I wasn't supposed to find it. That's the part I keep coming back to when I can't sleep. None of this was meant for me, not anymore. I'd already built a quieter life, changed my commute, changed my ringtone, changed the way I answered how's work, so it wouldn't turn into a story. Years ago, I watched my partner walk out of our office between two security guards, holding a cardboard box like it weighed more than he did. We didn't look at each other. Everybody learns the choreography for that scene long before it happens. Screens lock, chairs stop squeaking. Someone pretends to fix the printer so they don't have to be seen watching. The elevator doors closed around James and the floor breathed out. The email came this winter, on a Sunday that felt like a waiting room. I'd been sorting old receipts and clearing the kind of files you only notice when your laptop starts begging for mercy. The subject line read, "One last thing I wanted to leave behind." The sender was an account I didn't recognize, but the alias made my stomach drop. Big House Coffee. We used to duck out for burnt espresso at a place by the courthouse and joke that we'd end up there for a different reason someday. I hovered over the trash icon, then I opened it. No body text, just a single line and a link to an encrypted archive. If you still care, the password is what I used to say about the 7th floor. I didn't have to think. Museum, he'd call it, the floor where the executives kept oil paintings in silence. I typed it, and the file bloomed into folders like a map of places I wasn't allowed to go. Minutes, contracts, audio, photos. There was a readme at the top, small and polite. If this finds you, it's because I couldn't give it to anyone else without putting a target on their back. I hope you still read carefully. Before the winter, before the email, before I learned to sleep with my phone across the room, there was the day they took his badge. James was the kind of person you wanted next to you at a whiteboard. Never louder than the problem, never in love with his own answer. We were paired because we worked the same way. Start with the dumb question, rewrite the question, learn what the question was really for. When the audit started, he kept saying the same sentence. Something doesn't tally. Not wrong, not dramatic, just that. Then his access shrank by an inch a day. Then HR invited him to a quick check-in. He didn't come back from lunch. The company line was a paragraph about policy and standards. People repeated it like they were testing how it sounded in different mouths. I stayed. Staying felt like it had integrity at the time, like being the last one to switch off a light. They moved me 2 desks over and told me I'd be client-facing now, which is what they say when they need you to look loyal from certain angles. The director stopped learning my name and started calling me pal. Someone else adopted James's models without the notes that made them make sense, and the numbers behaved the way numbers do when you take away the person who listened to them. They told the truth, but the truth lost its shape. Rumor is a sloppy architect. It put up 3 versions of what happened. He'd siphoned travel funds. He'd doctored a dashboard to impress a client. He'd mouthed off to the wrong vice president in an elevator. People picked the floor plan that made them feel cleanest and moved in. I didn't pick. I took my lunches on the loading dock and learned what winter feels like when you eat standing up. Years pass in small decisions. What you don't say, what you don't ask, who you sit beside at the quarterly town hall when the CEO says family, twice in the first minute. I stopped visiting the 7th floor except when sent. I stopped taking the stairs because I didn't like passing the framed photo from the ribbon cutting, where James and I are blurry in the background, out of focus but still present. I convinced myself that the story had ended the only way it could. Stories do that. They finish themselves if you let them. The archive on my screen wasn't a story. It was a series of rooms. I clicked minutes and saw timestamps from meetings I wasn't in, names I knew arranged like a seating chart for a wedding where you don't get to choose your table. I clicked contracts and watched PDFs appear with red lines that started as cautious and became surgical. The audio folder had 8 files named like a person who never expects anyone else to read his stuff. Thurs Cleanup 1 EMP4A, Parking Lot EMP4A, Lobby Elevators .m4a. I stared at them until the cursor blinked like a patient. I made tea. I ran a virus scan as if malware were the danger here. I turned my phone face down and put it on top of the oven like the stove could keep it honest. Then I opened the text document in the root. It began with the way James always wrote to me, like we were still at that cafe with the oil burner and the chipped sugar jar. You once told me the only way to keep your hands clean is to touch nothing. The job is touching things. If I'm wrong, delete this. If I'm right, you already know. I thought about deleting it. I actually dragged the folder toward the trash. The window hesitated the way windows do when they're waiting for you to decide the kind of person you are. I let go, and the folder snapped back into place. Cowardice looks like caution until it doesn't. I clicked chess photos. They weren't dramatic, not the kind of thing you'd blow up on a projector. Phone pictures, a whiteboard with the words Q4, adjustment, optics only. In handwriting I recognized from our weekly stand-ups. A screenshot of a Slack thread where someone with a bird avatar said, "We can smooth it. It's not line if it's guidance." A printed memo with a corner folded down and a handwritten note in the margin. "This is my line." His line. He'd written it small. Back then, during the week after he left, I started carrying a pen again, not to take notes, to have something in my hand when people asked me how I was processing it. I'd say I was fine. I'd say I was focused on the deliverables. I'd say I was grateful for the opportunities, which is a sentence that tastes like cardboard unless you're starving. I went home and folded laundry like it had done something wrong. I told myself I hadn't been close to James because it was safer to say it that way. We were just good at the same kind of puzzles. We weren't the kind of friends who saw each other on weekends. We didn't owe each other anything heavier than a clean handoff. That's what I told myself while the company rewrote his name into a cautionary tale and then stopped saying it at all. The first audio file was recorded in a room I know, by the way. The HVAC hums. The small conference room with the crooked blinds near the legal department. You can hear someone pour coffee, and you can hear the way people who outrank you pause before they agree, so you know they weren't coached, they were negotiated. I listened to 40 seconds. Then I stopped it and stood in the kitchen with my palms flat on the counter until the laminate left a crosshatch on my skin. I told myself it could be out of context. Everything sounds worse when you only hear the middle. I told myself I wasn't a judge. I told myself to close the laptop and finish the taxes, because the IRS doesn't care what your old company did to someone who isn't you. Instead, I clicked contracts again and opened a file with a date that still makes my chest go tight. It was the week after our year-end bonus approvals. A clause I'd never seen before sat 3 paragraphs down, written like a seatbelt you're supposed to mistake for a ribbon. Automatic reconciliation permitted, where optics materially impact stakeholder confidence. I didn't speak legal, not really, but I spoke enough to know what those words try to do when they think no one is listening. Years ago, when they walked James out, the guard held the box from the bottom so it wouldn't fall. A stapler slid, a plant leaf stuck to the packing tape, and I realized the thing nobody says about those boxes. There's always something in them that doesn't belong to the job. A wrapper, a photo, a set of keys waiting to be returned. He carried his out like he was moving quietly through his own life, like you do when you're leaving a sleeping house, and you don't want to wake anyone you still love. The archive wasn't for the company. It wasn't for a reporter. It wasn't even for HR, though God knows he had enough to make them read slower. It was for me, or for someone who would recognize the weight of what he'd kept. It would have been easier if it had been someone else. I scrolled to the last line of the Riyadh Me. It said, "If they told you I lied, listen first. If they told you I stole, count first. If they told you I broke trust, ask whose." I thought of how he'd sit with a spreadsheet open until the screen started to burn into his corneas, and then look up at me and say it again, softer each time, like he was coaxing the truth out of numbers that didn't want to be touched. Something doesn't tally. When I opened the second audio file and recognized the voice that answered him, I realized what he'd done, and I stopped breathing. I didn't play the rest of the recording that night. I just sat there with the cursor blinking like a heartbeat and the sound of that voice, smooth, rehearsed, the kind of calm you only learn after you've lied for years, echoing in my head. It belonged to someone who still sent me Christmas cards, someone who had shaken my hand last month at a conference and said, "Good to see you holding it all together." I wanted to believe I'd misheard, that maybe the voice was a coincidence, that the file was edited or spliced. But James was too methodical for that. He didn't do coincidence. The next morning, I brought my laptop to work and sat in my car for 20 minutes before going inside. The company logo on the building's glass looked sharper than usual, like it knew what I was hiding. I opened the file again, hit play, and forced myself to listen. "We'll attribute the variance to human error," the voice said. "Reassign the audit trail and have legal wrap it under internal compliance adjustments." "That's falsifying statements," James replied. His tone wasn't angry, just tired. "It's protecting stakeholder confidence. Don't get emotional, James. You're not paid to moralize numbers." Then came the scrape of a chair, silence, a faint clipped laugh. "If you want to stay useful, learn the difference between truth and optics." That line. I could still hear it hours later, even over the hum of office chatter. I minimized the audio window, trying to breathe like nothing had changed, but everything had. Every conversation I'd ever had with that man. The same director who'd called me pal, the one who'd written James's termination letter, sounded different in my head now. I could still see the way he'd smiled at the farewell meeting, the way he'd told the team, "We're moving forward with integrity." Integrity. That word doesn't age well when you know who's saying it. By lunch, I'd listened to all 8 recordings. Meetings, hallway chats, phone calls. They painted the same picture. Budgets doctored, data manipulated, bonuses secured on numbers that were nothing but choreography. And then, buried between them, a voice memo James had recorded to himself, like a note he never meant to send. "They'll fire me before they fix it. If they're listening, that's the plan. But the truth leaves fingerprints. If you ever find this, don't just read. Remember who benefits." I sat there in my cubicle, pretending to read an email about project timelines, while the walls started to tilt. Every spreadsheet I'd worked on for the last 3 years, every adjusted projection, every contract revision, it was all built on the same lie. I wasn't clean. I'd helped polish the numbers that buried him. I closed my eyes and thought of the day he left, the way the air felt, the silence that stuck to everything. That wasn't guilt back then. It was relief. Relief that it wasn't me. And now it was something worse. The realization that it always had been. That night I drove home on autopilot, windows down even though it was freezing. My phone buzzed 3 times. Work group chat, a reminder for a client call, and one from an unknown number. Still keeping quiet? No name, no context. I froze at a red light. Could have been spam. Could have been someone inside. Either way, my throat went dry. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the last folder in the archive, the one labeled Match Personal. There was a single document. "To whoever finds this." It started like a letter, then turned into something else. "They'll say I took money. I didn't. I took the risk of telling the truth. You'll want to prove it, but be careful. Proof is expensive. I learned that the week they took my badge. If you're reading this, you're still there, which means they still got away with it." He'd left an address at the bottom, an old storage unit number, and a note. Physical copy, just in case. I stared at it until the screen dimmed. My stomach felt like it was filled with static. For a second, I thought about deleting everything. Pretend it never happened. Pretend James was just bitter, or paranoid, or wrong. But the thing about paranoia is that sometimes it's just pattern recognition in disguise. The next morning, I called in sick. I told them I had a fever, which wasn't a lie. It just wasn't viral. Then I drove 3 towns over to the storage facility. The clerk was half asleep, chewing gum and flipping through a magazine. I gave him the number. He didn't even look up. Yeah, that unit was cleared a year ago. Trash pickup handled the rest. Something twisted in my chest. I almost left. But when I walked past the rows of metal doors, I saw it. Unit 314. The padlock was rusted, but the number was still there, and below it, barely visible, scratched into the metal, were 2 words. Ask Evan. Evan, the head of compliance, my direct superior, the same man who'd signed off on James's dismissal. I drove home with my pulse in my teeth. By the time I got there, I'd already decided to confront him. I didn't plan revenge. I just wanted an explanation, a sentence that could make it smaller, make it survivable. Something like, you don't understand the pressure, or it wasn't personal. I could have lived with that. The next morning, I waited until he left his office for coffee and slipped the USB into his drawer. One of the audio files labeled with his own voice. No note, no accusation. Just the truth. He called me 2 hours later. Come to my office, he said, tone flat. I expected shouting. Instead, he closed the blinds, lowered his voice, and said, Where did you get this? I lied. It came through an anonymous tip. He stared for a long time. Then he smiled, not nervous, not guilty, calculated. You don't know what you're doing, he said. Delete it, and we can pretend this never happened. I asked what would happen if I didn't. His smile widened. Then you'll understand why James had to go? I didn't respond. I just walked out, my pulse hammering in my ears. By the time I reached the parking lot, I knew I wasn't deleting anything. I didn't know it yet, but opening that file was the beginning of the end. The first email came the next morning. No greeting, no signature, just, You shouldn't have opened it. I deleted it, told myself it was spam, but that lie only lasted until I got to work and found my badge access revoked. My name wasn't on the internal calendar anymore. My computer login failed twice before locking me out completely. I walked straight to IT. The kid at the desk, barely 22, looked at me like I'd stepped into the wrong building. Your account's under review, he said. Compliance request? Compliance. Evan's department. By lunch, whispers had already started. I could feel the air around me change, the same way it had the day they walked James out. Everyone talking softer. Monitors angled slightly away. A few pity glances that said, Not again. I left early. Told them I was sick. That night, I opened James's archive again, replayed the voice memos until I could quote them by heart. The sentences hit different now, the timing, the pauses. It all sounded less like paranoia, more like instruction. He hadn't just documented the truth, he'd hidden a trail. Inside one of the PDFs, halfway down a paragraph of corporate legalese, was a string of numbers that didn't belong. I copied it, ran it through a cipher. I remembered James once showing me back, when encryption was his favorite joke. It translated into a link. The link led to a cloud folder, public but unlisted. Inside video. The thumbnail was grainy, timestamped 2 weeks before he was fired. I clicked play. James sat at his desk, same brown tie, same calm eyes. If you're watching this, he began, then you already know what they did. But you don't know why I let them. He leaned forward. Because it had to be recorded, and someone had to survive it long enough to tell the story. Behind him, through the office window, I could see Evan pacing during what must have been one of those late-night strategy sessions. James turned the camera, catching the reflection just right. You could see the other men too, the VP, the CFO, passing around a folder, their faces bright under the conference light. I told them it was illegal, James said, voice breaking for the first time. They said, illegality's a spectrum. Morality's bad for business. Then he looked into the camera. So I recorded everything. If they erase me, you'll know. The video cut out there. I sat still for a long time, watching the frozen frame of his face, the kind of tired that doesn't sleep off. Outside, the streetlights hummed like bad electricity. By midnight, I'd decided to send the files to a journalist I knew from college, someone who'd written exposés on corporate fraud before. I compressed everything, audio, documents, video, and attached it to a single email with no subject line. To ClaireMuPostLedger.com. Message: if I disappear, this explains why. Then I hit send. The next morning, Claire replied, short, got it, let's talk. We met at a diner 2 towns over. She ordered black coffee, notebook already open. I handed her the USB and told her everything. James, the files, Evan, the threats. She listened, didn't interrupt, didn't even blink. When I finished, she said, "This is big, but it's dangerous. You sure you want this out?" "I'm already in it," I said. "Might as well finish the job." She smiled, sad and impressed at the same time. "Then let's finish it right." That was the last time I saw her. 2 days later, I tried to call. Her number was disconnected. Her work email bounced back. Then I got another message, this time to my personal inbox. "You talk too much." It came with an attachment, a screenshot of me at that diner. That night, someone knocked on my door. Once, twice, slow, not the rhythm of a neighbor. When I didn't answer, the knocking stopped, but the silence afterward felt like surveillance. I unplugged my Wi-Fi, wiped my drives, and started printing copies of everything. Hard evidence doesn't vanish when power does. I packed the pages into a box, shoved it under the floorboard. By morning, HR called. "We're conducting an internal review," the voice said, steady, too careful. "You're being placed on administrative leave, effective immediately." I almost laughed. They'd finally made it official. I drove to the river instead of the office, parked where the fog eats the edges of everything. My phone kept vibrating in the cup holder, unknown numbers, unmarked emails. I let them pile up. I watched the water and tried to remember when my life had last felt simple. Probably that first week, years ago, before James got too close to the truth. I should have felt fear, but what I felt was something else. A quiet click inside my head. That night, I mailed 1 copy of the printed evidence to the state attorney's office. No return address, just a note inside. Truth leaves fingerprints. And for a while, it felt like maybe that was enough. Until I woke up 3 nights later to the sound of my front door opening. It wasn't a creak. It was the unmistakable slide of a key in a lock that should have only existed in my pocket. I grabbed the nearest thing, a lamp, useless but heavy, and waited. Footsteps, slow, careful, then silence. And then a voice I hadn't heard since the day he was fired. Calm, almost tender. "You should have deleted it, man." I froze. "James?" But when I turned the corner, no one was there. Just the door, wide open, and my hard drive sitting in the middle of the floor, its light blinking red. That night, I stopped being the hero. Morning came quietly. Too quietly. The kind of silence that doesn't mean peace, but aftermath. The hard drive still sat in the middle of the floor. Red light off now, like a heart that had finished beating. I didn't touch it. Just watched sunlight creep across the casing until it looked almost harmless. I should have called someone. The police, a lawyer, anyone. But what would I even say? My dead co-worker might have broken into my house to return my own evidence. No one believes a story that sounds like guilt talking. So I made coffee instead, sat at the kitchen table with the taste of burnt fear on my tongue, and tried to act like I still had a life to manage. When I finally opened the drive, the archive was gone. In its place, a single folder named Enough. Inside, 1 file. A text document. "You did what I couldn't. Don't look for me. They will find each other soon. No signature, no timestamp. Just the last sentence in that calm, familiar tone. That week blurred. HR's internal review turned into a quiet termination. Severance pay, NDA, the usual hush money. They told me to focus on my next chapter. I didn't tell them it had already started without me. I sold my condo, moved 2 hours south to a place where no one cares who you used to be, took a contracting job fixing other people's numbers. Small business audits, clean work, no lies that require security clearances. My hands stopped shaking after a few weeks. My phone stopped buzzing after a month. And then, one night, in March, I saw it. Headline, third page of the business section. Federal investigation into Armitage Data Group reveals years of falsified reporting. Below that, a smaller line. Anonymous evidence submitted to the Attorney General's office prompted the inquiry. There were photos, men in suits being led out of the same glass building I'd once called home. One of them was Evan. His face looked smaller than I remembered, as if the truth had been living under his skin, waiting for a way out. The article didn't mention James or me. It didn't have to. That night I walked down to the pier with a flask and the drive in my pocket. The wind off the water carried the smell of rain and metal. I sat on the edge, opened the folder one last time. There was something new inside, a subfolder I hadn't seen before. Museum. Inside, just one video file. Sign-off.mp4. I pressed play. James was sitting outside somewhere. Park bench, trees behind him, early morning light. He looked older, but calmer. The camera wobbled once, then steadied. "If you're watching this," he said, "then it worked. Maybe not how we wanted, but enough. Truth doesn't need applause. It just needs oxygen." He looked off to the side like he was waiting for someone who never came. "They'll spin it, of course. They always do. But spin dies in sunlight. You did what I couldn't. You stayed." He smiled, small and tired. "Don't chase the credit. Just breathe. That's your reward." Then he leaned forward, whispering something the mic barely caught. "We're even now." The video ended. I sat there until the screen dimmed, until the wind picked up and the tide touched my shoes. Then I pulled the drive apart, wires, casing, memory chips, and tossed them into the water one by one. No drama, no music, just the quiet sound of small things sinking. I walked home barefoot, left my shoes by the door, and for the first time in years, didn't check my email before bed. Weeks passed. Spring settled in. The world didn't end. One morning I stopped at a diner on the way to a client meeting, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tastes like decisions. A waitress refilled my cup and asked, "You used to work upstate, right? At that big data place?" I nodded slowly. She smiled. "Saw it on the news. Whole thing blew up. Guess karma took her time, huh?" "Yeah," I said, stirring the coffee. "But she showed up eventually." She laughed and walked off. I sat there a moment longer, tracing the rim of the mug, thinking about James, about the way truth moves. Quietly, without permission. When I left, the sun hit the glass just right, and for a second I saw my reflection layered over the street outside. Same face, fewer ghosts. I don't know if it was justice, but it was enough.